Good morning, everybody. To see this room, plenty of delegations. Thank you very much and welcome to Rome. I'll turn into Italian for making my presentation. So you can have the translation, I think, in the headphones. Is there any problem? The volume is not good. Is it possible to adjust the technician is there? Yes? Okay. So good morning, everybody. Signora Presidente.
Madam President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, Mr. Secretary of State, Madam Deputy Secretary General of the Council of Europe, members of government, and members of Parliament of the member countries of the Council of Europe and the Mediterranean states, authorities, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor to host you here, the Chamber of Deputies, and to inaugurate this conference. Italy was the first founding country of the Council of Europe and of the European Union to ratify the Convention of Istanbul on preventing and combating violence against women and domestic violence. And I'm proud to say that the ratification was the first legislative step of this Parliament, and it took place in the summer of last year. It is for these reasons that once again, with great pride, together with the Italian Foreign Affairs Ministry and with the Council of Europe, we decided to organize here and host here, the Chamber of Deputies, this event under the title of Safe from Fear, Safe from Violence, celebrating the entry into force of the Istanbul Convention. What is the aim of this initiative? We wish to highlight the importance and the potential that this treaty holds out, and to encourage the countries that have not yet signed the convention to do so, and to encourage the parties to the convention to fully implement the provisions of this convention. As you certainly know, all those who are here today know very well that this convention is highly innovative. It defines violence against women as a violation of human rights. Now, this is historic. It is an extraordinary step forward, and we must make the most of it. It is a violation of human rights. It is no longer a private matter, no longer something that should be concealed behind the walls of our homes, no longer something that should be simply not spoken of, should it have taken place outside of the home. That is the past. These forms of violence are not only ethically unacceptable, violence against women, but it is a form of violence that carries a huge cost from a social and also an economic point of view. At a national level, at a European, at a global level, it is estimated that roughly 1 woman out of every 3 has been the victim of physical or sexual violence. And the costs for health expenditure, the social costs, the costs in terms of safety and the judiciary procedures, all of these costs are huge. We would like to be able to use those resources differently. And that is why it is imperative that we use all means that are available to put an end to this form of violence and to act in a strategic, coordinated, synergic way, as is stated very clearly in the Convention of Istanbul itself. In combating violence against women, repression is, of course, essential. Those who perpetrate violence against women must be prosecuted. They must be put in a position in which they will not be able to repeat this offense. At the same time, however, the protection of victims is crucial. The victims must be protected from both a physical and a legal point of view. They must receive the necessary assistance so that they may be able to start living again a full life and without fear, as we have in the title of our conference. Free from fear, free from violence. Far too often the women who report these offences are not protected. Far too often their reports do not lead to an end to the abuse and the violence. And of course this fuels a lack of confidence in the role of the state, and it means that only a tiny minority of the victims actually have the courage to seek justice. And not by chance, I believe, a recent survey of the Agency of the European Union for Fundamental Rights has reported higher rates of violence against women in the Scandinavian countries, countries where, as we all know, the indices on gender equality are much higher compared to the south of Europe. But perhaps, and it is my opinion, in these contexts, women are able simply to speak about what has happened without that sense of shame or that inherent sense of guilt that women feel in other contexts. It is not the women who should be stigmatized, but unfortunately this is still the case. This mindset still exists in many, many countries. However, I believe that here too, the Convention of Istanbul is highly innovative. The repression of the perpetrators and protection of victims, important though they are not enough on their own. The roots of this horrendous form of violence are much deeper, and we must start from there to defeat this violence. There's a widespread perception of women and their bodies. That is the root of this violence. Women are often used by mass media as objects that promote the sale of any sort of product. And we find these roots often in the very often violent, sexually based attacks against women who may hold positions of leadership, and these attacks are massive and ferocious on the web, and many authoritative female voices that used to be very active in the social media are now fleeing these social means of communication. Therefore, there's a great need for change in mindset, and that is the title of one of the sessions of our conference, a need to change mindsets about violence against women. We need to strive so that there will be more women in institutions, both representative and non-representative, in the business community, in academy, in civil service, not only because women account for 1/2 of the population globally and therefore should be equally represented in all sectors of society, not only because of that, but also because together women know how to go beyond their political differences that do exist, but they know how to go beyond that and fight together to achieve important outcomes in terms of the defense of rights. And we've seen this too with the adoption of the Convention of Istanbul. We saw how women were able to come together to advocate for women, to lobby together, to stand side by side. We need to promote effective policies, also to promote women's employment, because that is the basis of empowerment that enables women to escape violence. Women need to work. Women who are economically dependent will have a much harder time in escaping relations based on violence. Women who are empowered can choose and can escape from situations of violence much more easily. We also need to involve men much more. And I'm pleased to see a good number of men here with us in this hall today, because violence against women is not only women's business, it is very much an issue for men too. And to have positive results, of course, men must be involved. We need educational campaigns in our schools. Young people today are massively exposed to this commercial approach, this objectification of female bodies. We need to have a much more mature awareness of our gender and of what interaction with the other gender means. And that is the reason behind the awards that we have organized with the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, in particular the Italian delegation. We want to launch a prize, and we plan to do so in a few months' time. We want to choose the best thesis, graduation thesis, on the subject of violence against women, involving therefore students and their teachers throughout the country, in an attempt to study this phenomenon much more in depth. And we think it is an interesting tool to increase awareness. But of course we also have to look at the allocation of resources by government to prevent and to combat violence against women, and to offer protection and assistance to the victims of this violence. In times of economic crisis, this is an area in which investment should be stepped up rather than reined in. And we have to show our political will in this way with a fair distribution of resources. And finally, we must take action in the direction that is pointed out clearly in the Convention. We need plans and strategies at a local and a national level, and the implementation of these plans must involve all of the stakeholders. And at this point, I would like to encourage our Italian government to take action promptly. The appropriated funds are now being dispersed, but we must develop and implement our special plan against gender-based violence and sexual violence as soon as possible. It was announced in the legislation adopted against what is known as femicide. It was adopted last year. Violence against women is not some sort of atavic phenomenon that we are doomed to live with. It is not unavoidable. It is not a sort of natural, ineluctable fact. It is quite the opposite. It is the outcome of the very complex mechanisms that shape our society and our culture. And it needs to be combated as such today with the engagement of all. And today, together, we can defeat it. Thank you.
Bene, adesso.
Very well, now I'd like to give the floor to Gabriella Battaini-Dragoni, Deputy Secretary General of the Council of Europe, which is doing so much on this issue. It's worked so much for the Istanbul Convention and conducting this campaign among the states. President Boldrini, Minister and Secretary della Vedova, President Brasseur, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to begin in Italian by expressing my heartfelt gratitude to the organizers of this conference, namely the Italian Chambers of Deputy and the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I would like personally to thank, and you've heard the President speak now, so I would personally like to thank, and with some emotion, President Boldrini and also Minister Mogherini, who's not with us today, but who is represented by the Secretary of State. Without their firm commitment, this event would not have been possible. Though this is something I wish to underscore.
I switch to English now. On behalf of the Council of Europe, it is with immense pleasure and pride that I welcome you all to this conference. We are celebrating the entry into force of a groundbreaking treaty, the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence against women and domestic violence. In short, the Istanbul Convention, because it was opened, as you know, in Istanbul. The Istanbul Convention is the first of its kind in Europe and the most far-reaching treaty on this topic worldwide. Its measures form a comprehensive framework that provides a blueprint for any, I say any national set of policies to ensure that women and girls are safe and free from violence. The entry into force of the Convention, just 3 years after its opening for signature, is a testament to the strong political will that we have been able to build up to protect women and girls from all types of violence. This strong political will is demonstrated very clearly by the 14 ratifications and 22 member states of the Council of Europe that have signed the Convention. It is safe to say that there is now a crystal clear consensus that the Convention represents a groundbreaking human rights treaty. This was not always the case. This consensus was nowhere to be seen when we set out to negotiate the treaty in 2009. Long drafting group meetings were often bogged down by the inability to agree on how exactly to define the scope of the Convention. What was considered as agreed language in the international arena was often brought into question during our negotiations in Strasbourg. There can be no doubt about it. Many of the unique features of the Convention were hard-won gains. It is therefore all the more pleasing to see so much praise in Europe and beyond for our new landmark treaty. Praise that is resonating with the media and the wider public. On 1st August, the day the Istanbul Convention entered into force, the treaty was widely reported on by newspapers and media outlets in Europe and beyond. Much more, of course, has been published and broadcast since. This goes to show that taboos around this issue are being lifted, and that the Istanbul Convention is already working as a tool to change attitudes. Through the Convention and our partners in education and media, we now have the opportunity to bring about a change of mindset within society. Doing so will help ensure that violence against women is understood for what it is: a shocking violation of human rights. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come so far together, but there is so much work that needs still to be done. This conference provides us with a valuable opportunity to take stock of where we stand right now. It gives us an opportunity to consider what more needs to be done to advance the great unfinished business of the 21st century, namely advancing rights and opportunities for women and girls. Rape, domestic violence, stalking, forced marriage, female genital mutilation, sexual harassment, forced abortion. These are all manifestations of male domination over women. These are human rights violations and must be considered as structural violence. They are toxic components of a social system containing an imbalance of power and unequal opportunities for women and men. With this in mind, Measures contained in the Istanbul Convention are firmly based on the premise that violence against women cannot be eradicated without investing in greater equality between women and men. And thank you, Mrs. President, to having underlined this basic concept. The bottom line is that only real equality between women and men and the change in power dynamics and attitudes can truly prevent violence against women. The key answer to how we can stop violence against women is therefore not exclusively crime control. The answer is making sure that women and men are equal partners. The answer is making sure that women and men have the same rights, the same responsibilities, and the same opportunities. It is making sure that women's contribution to society is equally visible, valued, and respected. Ladies and gentlemen, let us also not forget that as innovative and advanced as it is, the Istanbul Convention is also a pragmatic tool. The Convention is more than simply words on a paper to be quoted at high-level conferences such as this one. A tool is made to be used and applied. During the day, we will hear about the requirements of the Convention, which consist of 4 important pillars: prevention, protection of victims and those at risk, prosecution, and policies that are comprehensive and holistic. These are the cornerstones of the Convention. There are many features that make the Istanbul Convention such a sophisticated tool in filling a gap in the protection of women's rights to life, liberty, and security. I think 3 of them deserve to be highlighted here. First, it is the unique international treaty to affirm that violence against women is a human rights violation. Article 3 defines violence against women as, and I quote, violation of human rights and a form of discrimination against women. Second, the Convention tackles head-on the reality of abuse against women by making it clear that violence against women is not a private matter. On the contrary, it is the responsibility of our authorities to protect women and girls from violence suffered in the privacy of their homes. For the truth is, violence against women is not limited to shady back alleys in the dark of night. Much more often, it is inflicted at home by someone women know, someone women trust. Third, the Convention puts an end to isolated measures and pilot projects by calling for member states to adopt a comprehensive set of policies. This means that in the future, it will not be good enough to come forward with 1 or 2 pieces of legislation. What the Istanbul Convention requires is no less than a master plan to combat all forms of violence against women and domestic violence. Dear friends, the success of the Istanbul Convention and the success of our efforts to tackle violence against women and domestic violence will largely depend on the political will of governments. It will depend on the continuous engagement of parliaments and parliamentarians, of local authorities and civil society. We have to make sure that the issue of violence against women and domestic violence stays high on the political agenda for as long as it is needed. Cooperation between international organizations should act as a catalyzer, allowing all these positive forces to converge towards the effective protection of women's human dignity. Looking ahead, the Council of Europe will continue to join forces with the United Nations, the European Union, and other organizations so that the Convention remains something tangible for all women, so that women across the world can continue to benefit from our noble mission and our community of values. Because for too long, the history of abuse against women has been a history of silence. It is therefore our duty, today as well as in the months and years ahead, to provide a voice to the women of the world whose ordeals have gone unnoticed, to those who have suffered in silence. It is our duty to speak out, to speak for those who cannot. We can never again plead ignorance, as we know what is at stake. By marking the entry into force of the Istanbul Convention, we are sending a strong message to the world from here, from Rome, that there can be no impunity for perpetrators of violence against women. Together, we need to shatter the culture of impunity and make justice the norm, not the exception, for these crimes. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by stating the obvious. We will not succeed in eradicating violence against women overnight. But if we bring together all our efforts, if we share what we have learned over all these years, and if we inspire others to join us, then I know that we will find the strength to stay on course for the future, putting an end to impunity and shielding women from violence in all corners of the world. Thank you, and I wish you all a fruitful and inspirational conference. Thank you.
Grazie alla dottoressa.
Thank you to Gabriella Battaini-Dragoni, who has focused the convention and has underscored all the crucial points of this convention. I'd like to give the floor to the President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, Anne Brasseur, who, as I understand, will be speaking in Italian, and we thank her for this effort.
Devo dire
I must say that it's difficult for me to speak Italian, so I'd like to begin in Italian, but I will at some point switch to French, which is better for me and also better for you, I think. Madam President of the Chamber of Deputies, Secretary of State, Deputy Secretary General of the Council of Europe, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends. First of all, I wish to thank the organizers of this initiative, a conference which is at the same time an exchange of knowledge and a celebration. Many thanks to the Chamber of Deputies and to its President, President Boldrini, who I had the pleasure of meeting for the first time last week in Oslo at the conference of presiding officers of parliaments. And I wish to express my congratulations for her political commitment. In her first term, she already has the honor of presiding over this Chamber of Deputies, which confirms greatly acknowledged enthusiasm and commitment. Many thanks to the Deputy Secretary General of the Council of Europe, dear Gabriella. It is a great pleasure to be able to celebrate together with you this very important achievement of our organization. My heartfelt thanks also go to the Italian government, and in particular Minister Mogherini, who, as you know, has been a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe and in particular of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination, which devoted so much effort to drawing up the Istanbul Convention. I had the pleasure of receiving Minister Mogherini last Tuesday in Strasbourg, and I wish to reiterate my congratulations on her appointment as a High Representative of the EU for Foreign Policy and Security. Her knowledge of both institutions will help us to bolster the complementarity between the European Union and the Council of Europe, particularly when we have at stake human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. With regard to these principles, there must be no difference between the protection of the citizens of the Union and the citizens of non-member states. I will now switch to French. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, the Istanbul Convention is path-breaking in many ways. This convention is a move forward which establishes a standard of excellence and completes the existing legal provisions and extends the international framework in the area of equality and empowerment of women. On my participation at the 58th session of the Committee on Women's Condition in New York this March, I met the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon. During our conversation, I drew his attention to the importance of making opening the recent convention of the Council of Europe, and in particular the Council of Istanbul, to make them standards stretching beyond the frontiers of Europe. It is essential to avoid watering down the scope of these texts, and in particular this Convention of Istanbul should not be should remain a standard. We have now come to the stage of the entry into force, and this gives us new momentum to face the challenges which await us, such as an effective implementation and follow-up. The Convention of Istanbul is the result of collective effort. The Council of Europe has dedicated the work of many bodies to this process. Parliamentary Assembly has given its full political support and has taken a full part in this process. It, in fact, begun encouraging the Council of Europe to develop an international instrument which is of a binding nature on violence against women. And following this, the Assembly took an active part in the negotiations on the text of the Convention and gave its green light on the final draft by means of an opinion, as is envisaged in the procedure of adoption of every Convention of the Council of Europe. The Member States have also provided a key input in instructing their experts to draft the text of the Convention within an ad hoc committee. They did a very thorough and at times a very politically delicate job, often very brave jobs, always keeping in mind the need to provide an effective response to the challenge of violence against women. Thirdly, civil society, and in particular NGOs active in the field of human rights, have had the possibility of contributing to the work in expressing their opinions during the drafting of the text. An important role was carried out by members of Parliament, the work of which was coordinated and inspired by the Parliamentary Network for the Right of Women to Live Without Violence, and in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. I'd like to thank these members of Parliament who come from 51 countries and also the observers and the partners for democracy at the Parliamentary Assembly, who are also represented here today. And I particularly wish to thank my colleague Mendes Bota, political coordinator of this very active group and general rapporteur of the Parliamentary Assembly on violence against women, for his unfailing commitment. He is the best ambassador of women. Thank you. His visits to European capitals, to North Africa, and also in America, from New York to Brasilia, have contributed to promoting the convention and making it known worldwide. But there is still a lot to do. We have gathered here in Rome to celebrate a success, but we know that the entry into force of the Istanbul Convention is not the end of our efforts. In fact, a lot remains to be done, and here I address my colleagues who are members of Parliament, so many of whom are with us, to say that national parliaments have a particularly important role to play. First of all, legislative work has to be carried out rapidly in order to bring the laws of the various countries in line with the Convention. I'm also turning to the Parliament of Luxembourg and to the representative of Luxembourg, my country, because Luxembourg still has a lot of work to do for the ratification of this convention. At the same time, national parliaments will be involved in the process of follow-up and evaluation of the application of the convention. This will give us the possibility to contribute actively to protecting women from fear and from violence, and to ensure the effective enforcement of the text of the convention. This acknowledgement of the role of members of parliament is an innovative element in the system created by the Istanbul Convention, which bestows upon us great responsibility. This is a responsibility which we want to shoulder, because as we have done so far, because this is something which is due to all victims of violence. Civil society and NGOs will be very valuable partners in our work. NGOs can and should also act as warning signals. They can draw the attention of institutions to the problems which occur on the ground, and they can give a voice to victims who all too often are enclosed in silence. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the entry into force of the Istanbul Convention marks a fundamental stage for the protection of human rights. But as we all know, it would be oversimplistic to consider it simply as a legal instrument, however unique and innovative it is. The Istanbul Convention has a soul. It is a project for the society of tomorrow, in which violence against women will no longer be justified, forgiven, or minimized. It will be prevented, combated, punished, and finally refused by all. The entry into force of the Istanbul Convention calls us all to ensure that this vision of the future will become a reality as soon as possible, because women who are victims of violence have already waited too long. Thank you. Mille grazie.
Grazie alla Presidente della
Thank you. We'd like to thank the President of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and I would like to give the floor to Mr. Benedetto della Vedova, Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, Italy. Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, for hosting this conference and this important discussion. Dear colleagues, dear friends, I would like to bring you the greetings of Minister Mogherini, who would have liked to be here, but today is in New York, owing to important international commitments, and regrets not being able to share this in this important event with you. And I think it's very important that this event be organized, because it deals with something that has an extraordinary importance, both nationally and internationally. I'd like to return to a point made by President Boldrini, and that is the need to involve men. I think we're all aware of the fact that violence against women is almost exclusively a man's problem, and it calls into question first and foremost the human and political and civic conscience of us, the men, and I think that really should be the starting point of our discussion. And we should, of course, recognize the value of the extraordinary work done first in the Council of Europe and then in Parliament. Certainly this was the case of the Italian Parliament, that as very promptly to the appeal, to the need, thanks also to the work of our speakers and deputy speakers. But it is a tool that is available to all of the member countries. Many have yet to sign and ratify. But as we were saying yesterday in our welcome dinner, it is a tool that is open to be used by other countries, non-European countries, Mediterranean countries, countries that may not belong to the Council of Europe, but that certainly may ratify the instrument and render the convention binding in their country, bringing them into their national legislation. And I think that this is an important event for us to highlight the importance of the integrated and holistic approach that has always guided the action of the Council of Europe in dealing with violence against women and domestic violence. And in particular, this convention stresses the fact that violence against women should be considered as a violation of human rights. This is a point that has already been made very clearly by the previous speakers. It is a form of discrimination and therefore should be seen in the broader setting of international settings that apply in the area of the human rights of women. I'm thinking in particular of the Convention on the Protection Against All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the Council of Europe Convention of Lanzarote, children, against discrimination of children, which has introduced harsher sentences and protection against violence in families and households for women and children. The Convention Against Human Trafficking, and we know how topical this subject is today throughout Europe. And in particular, I would say in Italy, President Boldrini has experience working in this area for many, many years. We know that violence against women and discrimination against women is tightly linked to human trafficking, to these dramatic situations that we see unfolding on the southern shores of Italy month after month. There are different types of crime that are considered in the Convention of Istanbul, and the states are committed to introducing these offences in their legislation that apply both to times of peace and war. Stalking is included, physical violence, sexual violence, including rape, Article 37, female genital mutilation, Article 38. Italy has already waged quite a battle in this area with the help of many associations and the contribution of many important politicians. I would cite the former Foreign Minister, Mrs. Emma Bonino, who was the front line in this area. Sexual harassment, forced and childhood marriage, and here too in Geneva, I represented the Italian government in the Too Young to Wed campaign, with the leadership of many countries, including Canada, the Netherlands, but we also are deeply committed to this campaign, which also is an appeal to the conscience of men. These crimes are often envisaged by our criminal code, but not all very specifically, and therefore we have to begin to look at the implementation also of our international commitments in line with the prescriptions of the Convention of Istanbul. We must introduce more integrated policies and at the same time ensure that we have a systems-wide implementation of the so-called human rights approach, which is centered on the protection of the victim and the duties of the state, and a gender-sensitive human rights approach and a gender-sensitive approach. Now, the prompt ratification on June 19, 2013 of the Convention in Italy is a clear, unambiguous sign of a change in direction and a new perception of the need to act in a very consistent and coherent way. I believe that the approval was unanimous in Italian Parliament. Is that being confirmed in both, yes, Senate and the Chamber of Deputies? And in less than 1 year from the adoption of the Convention of Europe in 2012, both houses of Parliament unanimously adopted the Convention. And therefore here today with you, I would invite us all to reflect on the need to step up our cooperation in the area of human rights, combating discrimination, both internally, and that includes the judiciary, working with law enforcement agencies, because we know that the roots of violence against women often lie in a fragile set of relations and sets of values that are unfortunately typical in our societies. Violence against women is structural, it has a global reach. It should induce us to reflect on those customs and patterns of behavior that may directly or indirectly be the source of discrimination and violence against women. Childhood marriage was mentioned before, female genital mutilation, other forms of violence against women and girls. Those forms of violence that can take place in times of peace and in areas of conflict and in fragile states. In terms of positive action through the development of activities, we must work in a cross-cutting way to ensure gender equality. Following the UNSCR 2013 committee for the years 2014-2016, I would mention the programs of Italian cooperation, the training courses that are being organized at the training center of our law enforcement agencies for peacekeeping forces, which has special modules dedicated to prevention and to investigation in the case of violence, and other plans to deal with gender-based violence in areas of conflict through specialized training of the law enforcement agencies in this area. So Italy has been active for a long time now in terms of its foreign policy, promoting women in the areas of peace, security, development, and human rights, which are the three pillars of the United Nations. Protection of women in areas against violence in areas of conflict is one of our highest priorities. We believe that women can no longer be seen simply as survivors of violence, but they're agents of change. And discrimination against women is becoming less and less acceptable, both socially and culturally, and we therefore must pool our efforts and work together to promote the human rights of women and gender equality. We owe this to women, we owe this to men as well, and we owe this in particular to the victims. In a systems-wide approach with the effective involvement, engagement of the judiciary and law enforcement, but also the healthcare sector, and all those who are necessary and can bring about a good cooperation of the public and the private sector. And I therefore call for us to step up our actions. I think that we can receive that boost from the important events that will take place in 2015, Beijing +20, the post-2015 development agenda, for instance, and the high-level review of the 2035 resolution on women, peace and security. We will be sure to do our part. Minister Mogherini, as she still is exercising her role of Italian foreign minister, but certainly will continue to do so as the High Representative of European foreign policy, the role she is soon to take over. But as was said yesterday and has been repeated today, Violence against women must be debated, must be understood by men who unfortunately are the source of this violence most often, and only in this way can we hope to overcome this great problem. Thank you.
Grazie, Sottosegretario.
Thank you, Secretary of State Mr. della Vedova, for having reminded us of Italy's commitment
Su altri organismi come le Nazioni Unite e più ampiamente diciamo, l'impegno italiano attraverso la cooperazione internazionale. Allora, io adesso vorrei che noi invitassimo i rappresentanti dei governi dei paesi che hanno sottoscritto, appunto, ratificato la Convenzione di Istanbul a leggere una parte della dichiarazione. È un passaggio.
This is a very important step forward, reading out this part of the declaration. I think it's important to emphasize the innovative content of this Convention of Istanbul. And therefore I would start with Secretary of State della Vedova. And then, yes, you'll take turns reading from the podium. I will invite the other ministers and secretaries of state of the other countries who are here with us today to continue. So let us start with Mr. della Vedova.
Le parti contraenti della Convenzione del Consiglio d'Europa.
We contracting parties of the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence Instant salute with favour the entry into force of the Istanbul Convention, the first European treaty which is binding, which defines a general framework to put an end to the violence against women and domestic violence. Thank you. I'd like to call on Elena Dalli, Minister for Social Dialogue, Consumer Affairs and Civil Liberties of Malta, to join us here at the front. You got the declaration?
I'm not sure that this...
Buongiorno. Riconosco
Recognize that achieving equality between women and men in law and in practice is key to preventing violence against women.
Grazie.
Adesso inviterei il Ministro.
I'd like to call on the Minister Family and Social Policy of Turkey, Aysener Islam.
Signora Ministra Islam.
Tüm şiddet türlerine karşı kadının etkin bir şekilde korunmasını ve kadına yönelik
We, the contracting states to the Council of Europe Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, will make a pledge to implement it fully.
Molte grazie.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister.
Çok teşekkür ederiz Sayın Bakan. Portekiz yetkilisine Sayın Torres Moai.
manifestamos a nossa esperança.
Express our hope that the implementation and monitoring of the Istanbul Convention will effectively fill existing gaps in the protection of women's human rights and will help to protect children, men and elderly victims of domestic violence.
Molte grazie. Molte grazie, signora Sottosegretaria.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary of State. And now I'll give the floor to our Secretary of State, Secretary of State Benedetto della Vedova. This is a message with which we conclude this declaration. We urge other Council of Europe member states, non-member states, as well as the European Union to become parties to the Convention.
Bene, adesso.
Very well, now we have a video, a brief video video of the Council of Europe on violence, and so I'd like to ask you to show this video. I don't know whether we have to move from here. Yes, okay, we'll do that.
Sì, mi vorrei... Thank you for coming. Veramente...
This Council of Europe video, I think, was excellent, and I think that we could also make use of our platforms to disseminate it. I think it's very effective. Congratulations to the Council of Europe for this awareness raising program. Now we'd like to begin the proceedings proper with a portion where we'll be listening to the Director of the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, Morten Kjærum, and then we'll be listening to some very interesting statements from experience. So I'd like to give the floor to Director Kjærum.
Yes, you go to the podium.
Madam President, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's really a great pleasure and honor for me to be here today in this particular celebration of the Istanbul Convention. I must say, I think it is really something to celebrate. And of course, I very much want to congratulate you with this particular event and taking this important initiative, but definitely also the Council of Europe for its vision, its hard work, and not least the powers of persuasion in driving this work to where we are today, where it's entering into force. It is remarkable. Very often in conferences we talk about milestones, and it's sort of a buzzword that we use. But I would say in this case we are really talking about a milestone in the work in combating the violence against women. And why is this so? The Istanbul Convention offers an entire region a legally binding standard for the first time, containing a comprehensive framework for effective policies to combat violence against women. I would like to highlight just 3 elements. There's a lot to say about the convention, but let me just highlight 3 elements that I will come back to. But first of all, it takes, as it says in the convention, it takes a multi-level approach to combat violence against women. It focuses not just on cure, but also on prevention. And thirdly, it includes, as we have heard other speakers focusing on, includes men and boys as crucial ingredients in finding the ways forward and in finding the solutions. And I'm, of course, very honored to be one of the token men in the sequence of speakers today. So thank you very much. These and many other provisions in the Convention will in turn help towards the change in mentality we need in order to fight against women effectively and lastingly. Certain manifestations of violence against women, such as female genital mutilation or forced marriages, predominantly have an impact on particular groups of the population and, of course, warrants specific responses. But the Istanbul Convention helps us to recognize that these are just the pieces in the bigger puzzle, and that violence against women is far more widespread. That the Convention has now been ratified by the prerequisite number of countries to enter into force is a very positive sign that the facts have been taken on board in many places and action has been started to be taken. I would like to just highlight 2 very positive examples, of course, one from Italy, where here in Italy a number of important measures for victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse have been introduced, including a stipulation that investigations into alleged crimes must be concluded within 1 year of reporting. Very important step. And in Portugal, steps are now being taken to strengthen support for victims of sexual violence by setting up rape crisis centers for the first time. These 2 are very important, very practical, necessary steps to be taken. But ladies and gentlemen, I do not want to detract from the atmosphere of celebration. However, there is definitely still a lot to be done in the current situation. So therefore, allow me to cite a few figures from the survey that the Fundamental Rights Agency just released earlier this year. In this survey, we interviewed more than 42,000 women face-to-face for each 1 to 2 hours about their experience with violence. And I tell you, these stories from these 42,000 women tell dreadful stories of suffering that have continued for weeks, months, not to talk about years. These figures demonstrate what a long path we still have ahead of us, and also just how necessary it is for ratification process of the Istanbul Convention to continue. Let me just give you a few examples. An estimated 13 million women in the EU were victims of physical violence in the course of the 12 months prior to our survey. So the last 12 months of the survey, an estimated 13 million women. An estimated 1.5 million women in the EU were raped in the course of those 12 months. That's equivalent to the entire population of the city of Vienna. These figures are shocking. And so too are other areas that we examined that we're only beginning to recognize as forms of violence against women. One of the newest and most insidious of these is cyber harassment, which for a long time was not really regarded as significant. Indeed, I'm often astonished that this widespread problem is still sort of belittled as not very serious. What is the problem? This is, of course, completely missing the point. Firstly, what starts as harassment can certainly become a physical attack at a later stage. That's sort of an obvious link. But more importantly, this attitude ignores long-term physical scars and psychological scars that can be left by harassment and hatred spread by social media in internet, chat rooms, or via mobile phones, particularly to young women. And here again, let me quote one figure from our survey. 20%, a fifth of the women between the age of 18 and 29 have experienced cyber harassment since their age of 15. So 20% of the young women. While social media platform companies, they were relatively quick to address issues of racism and anti-Semitism on their platforms. They have dragged their feet over violence and hate against women. This really needs to be changed and beefed up. However, it's not only the number of women who have been victims of gender-based violence or cyber harassment that is alarming. It is also the debilitating fear of violence. More than half of women in the EU avoid certain places or situations for fear of being physically or sexually assaulted. Now one could say that in order to combat violence against women, we need to ensure women are empowered to leave the home, to work, to live their own lives and on their own terms. But first of all, we still face enormous challenges on the path to empowerment. And secondly, even after we have reached the stage at which women are empowered, they are by no means free from discrimination or harassment. This becomes clear from the response to a very specific question we asked in our survey, which showed that 75% of women in the top management category have experienced sexual harassment. Indeed, from our findings, we see that sexual harassment is widespread among women with a university degree. So violence against women cut across all social groups and all workplaces. Nobody can say we are off the hook. Everybody will have to look into this issue. So, ladies and gentlemen, the text of the Istanbul Convention allows us to take steps on all these issues. So we now have to look very hard into the implementation. So let me just highlight two concrete actions. Firstly, as I mentioned in the beginning of my remarks, a multi-agency approach that establishes and enhances cooperation between the police, employers, doctors, and other health professionals, as well as internet service providers, is vital. Indeed, our survey findings show that an overwhelming majority of women in the EU would actually be happy for doctors to ask routinely whether certain injuries have been caused by violence. There's no fear of being addressed on this issue, what we can see from the response. Such conversations between doctors and patients, as well as the broader cooperation between medical and other services, could help to remove the taboos still surrounding violence against women and bring the issue into the open where it belongs. My second point, the issue of violence against women is also very much one of gender equality, or rather inequality. The Convention recognizes the need for legislation and policies that promote equality. It's interesting in this regard to look at FRA's survey results in conjunction with the Gender Equality Index that our sister agency, the European Institute for Gender Equality has made. And you mentioned, you referred to it, and I do believe also that there's an element of openness that leads to these quite astonishing figures. Of course, that was quite surprising when we saw these figures and the openness could be one. But I also think there is one other element, and that is that with traditional models of gender having been challenged over the past decades, we need to debate about how we help men to find our place in the new roles in society and as well as in our families. I think there's something here. I actually do believe that some of us men living in countries with a high level of gender equality, I'm from Denmark, which is scoring highest in our survey, I do believe when I speak to my friends, see my sons, that we need to discuss what is going on, where is our role, how do we behave in these new roles. This may also be an element to look further into. So the role of men, not just as perpetrators of violence against women, but also in society more broadly, obviously need to be explored and studied, researched much more in detail to understand some of these phenomena. But above all, we need a public debate stressing that hassling, harassing, or hitting women is not attractive, is not manly, and is not acceptable in any way. So, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, the Istanbul Convention gives us the framework we so desperately needed to address these issues. So let us celebrate today, but let us also agree to meet for another celebration in 5 or maybe 10 years from now, when we hopefully can say that there are fewer offenses against women, cyber hate has diminished, more men and boys have found an identity where there's no space for violence against women. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ringrazio il direttore della... Thank you. I'd like to thank the Director of the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights for having pointed out these different aspects of violence and also mentioned clearly the fact that it is not the women but possibly the men who should be stigmatized when they have perpetrated violence. I now would like to give the floor to a journalist and a writer from the United Kingdom, Catherine Cornby, and she will tell us a little more about her work in this area. You have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Good morning still, everybody. I'm a journalist and I work mainly for Newsweek Europe, and in fact I covered the Fundamental Rights Agency report, which was an excellent report, and the Istanbul Convention only a few weeks ago, and I want to recommend it. I'm just so excited by this huge achievement. In fact, I covered the cyber harassment findings in the Fundamental Rights Agency report, which are particularly disturbing, I think, particularly pernicious findings. But I'm here really to talk about the very exciting achievement of the Istanbul Convention, and to tell a few stories from my work as a social affairs journalist to explain the difference, the kind of before and after, the difference the Convention could make to the survivors of long-term and acute violence. So I have written a number of books mainly with women who've survived violence, disabled women, Romani and traveller women in the UK, and most recently I've been working on a book with a woman who's a British Yemeni woman who has survived a forced marriage, and that book is called Hear My Cry, and Gabriella talked about the voices of silenced women earlier on, and she doesn't want her her voice to be silenced, and I wanted to share some of her story with you all today. Diana Kader graduated from University in Manchester in the north of England with a degree in human sciences in 2006. And that was very, very unusual for a British Yemeni young woman, almost unheard of for the Yemeni community in the UK. In Manchester, I think she was the first. She was, in fact, the first in her family. Neither her father nor mother could read or write, in fact, but her parents wanted her to go to university. And after she graduated, they decided to take their entire family back to Yemen on a family holiday. They were incredibly proud of her. So they all went back. Now, they'd never been back to Yemen, the whole family. They'd never been able to afford it. They'd been on day trips to Alton Towers, like theme parks in the UK. But they were very, very excited as kind of devout Muslims and really, you know, they were caught between two worlds. They were very, very proud of their Yemeni roots, but they were also Manchester kids. They'd never, ever been to this place that they were proud to call their homeland. So they were off to see their extended family in Yemen, but within days, the sisters in the family, Diana and her sisters, were being wooed by men. And in fact, within a few days, a young man in central Yemen asked for Diana's hand in marriage. Now, Diana didn't know him, and she turned him down. Now, unusually, as you probably know, in forced marriage situations, her parents actually supported her in that situation. But the suitor was very, very persistent and carried on saying, "You have to marry me." And eventually, Diana's father had to physically throw him out of the house where they were living in a very small village. But it didn't end there. One day, when Diana was driving alone in the family's 4x4 along a desert highway, her spurned suitor ran her over in a petrol tanker. And that was obviously a botched honour killing. Now, she nearly died that day. Her pelvis was shattered, her arm and leg were broken, and she sustained severe internal injuries. And then the killer, the attempted killer, phoned her father and threatened to leave her by the side of the road like a dog. Now, somehow she survived that, and for some reason, he then took her to a hospital. Now, while she was in the hospital, further attempts were made on her life, but somehow Diana's father, who is an absolute hero and a true feminist, I would say, managed to get her back to the UK. He had to sell the family home in Yemen to pay bribes to airline officials. He got her back to the UK, and then Diana spent 3 months in intensive care and nearly 3 years in rehabilitation. She was told she would never walk again. But actually she's now at work as a forensic scientist in the UK. She does walk, she has some permanent disabilities, and she lives in constant pain. She never got justice in Yemen, but really the point is that neither did she get justice in the UK, and she's faced blowback in the UK, and the UK has also failed her as regards justice. And sort of institutional justice. Now, the forced marriage unit in the UK did not support her. That's part of the Foreign Office. Even though she wrote to the Foreign Office and asked her for help, the Foreign Office did not refer her to our forced marriage unit. So that was the first failure. Neither local nor national political figures helped her, even though she wrote to them, including actually the Prime Minister at the time, Gordon Brown, who's actually a national hero at the moment because of the Scottish referendum, but we'll let that one pass. But what was really bad was that the police force in Manchester absolutely failed her. I've counted 20 separate attacks on Diana. And some of them were very, very serious, including arson, which is when you attempt to burn someone out of the house, to Diana, including her car being tampered with, including constant on-street harassment. And yet, every time that these attacks happened, including attempted abduction of her niece and nephew from school, it was dealt with by a separate police officer. None of these attacks were joined up as seen as honour-based violence. It was only when I actually intervened last year and suggested this might be an honour-based violence campaign that they were given one police officer to deal with their attacks. Now, that's a kind of before the convention approach. Now, one would hope with the blueprint for her coordinated victim-centred approach, one would hope that you would see a better approach and that it would filter down to the police force in individual countries. Of course, the UK has not ratified the Convention. One can but hope that it will ratify the Convention and start to change attitudes to survivors such as Diana, because I believe that Diana and survivors of so-called honour-based violence are in great danger in the communities in which they live, because where you have a situation where the community does not support the survivor but instead takes the side of the attacker, they remain in great danger. So it's wonderful that the Council of Europe and other institutions are leading international efforts to protect women's human rights, but we need individual police officers and police forces, MPs and other people in positions of authority to take that on board and implement it. And it's all in the implementation, and that's always the challenge. Just coming on to another point, which is really the community basis of so-called honour-based violence. The drafters of the Convention were very careful in the wording that means that no one can invoke an honour defence for any kind of violence. But there remains, and this is a general point really, really with honour-based violence, there is a real focus on family members and their part in so-called honour killing. Diana's case and others, according to the charity that supports her, ECRO, in the UK, has demonstrated how a whole community can bring an almost unbearable pressure to bear on a family to enforce the honour code. In Diana's case, her family stood against that and they did not force Diana to get married, but so many families do not, and they force individual women to get married. So how do we bring that focus of prevention in the Convention to bear on so-called honour crimes and ease that community pressure on families who are seeking to modernise and live between two worlds? Just coming on to domestic violence, another invisible world, that world behind closed doors. That's another one that's explored in the Convention to the immense credit of those working on it. Now, no statute can ever prevent violence, and that's something that the explanatory notes in the Convention make clear. But the Convention can encourage countries that ratify it to provide victims and witnesses with advice and support. And one key component of that is the refuge, and women can go with their children, and they really save lives. But unfortunately, in the UK, we have a real problem with refuges. A lot of them have closed recently. In fact, we've had specialist domestic violence posts have been cut. We've had 10 specialist services lost in the first quarter of this financial year alone, and they're really important. So 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence at some point in their lifetime, but 1 in 2 disabled women will experience domestic violence at the hand of a partner, carer or family during their lifetime. And often that violence will be adapted to the impairment of the woman. So for instance, if you're a wheelchair user, you're using an electric wheelchair, you might have the battery taken out of your wheelchair. So it's kind of, you know, your punishment is adapted to your impairment. Women with learning difficulties often are sexually abused and deliberately targeted because they're seen as unreliable witnesses by the police. And then the case is far less likely to get to court. So, you know, as I said, we've seen 10 specialist services lost and 17% of refuges closed completely since 2010. So it's disappointing when the Convention has come into force and stressed how important refuges are. However, I think we should sort of end on an optimistic note. As I said, stalking is a very, very important component of the Convention, the prevention of stalking. And I think the Convention will probably save lives with that stress on conventioning, both the lives of women and men. The Convention was carefully drafted to have no gender bias, actually, on stalking, because both women and men are stalked. I'm particularly interested in the introduction of protection and restraining orders, thus restraining perpetrators from approaching victims. This particular crime, one stalking campaigner in Britain called it murder in slow motion. I think things will change for the better in Europe, and that will also improve things in other regions as well. And I think this whole convention is the sea change that so many campaigners have wanted for so many years. It puts the survivor, the victim, at the heart of the process. And when Diana Kader lay on that desert road in Yemen with her attacker lying, smiling down at her, she decided she would live and tell her tale for the sake of her family, but also for the sake of other women. And she's been very, very clear about that. She wanted to go back to work and survive for the sake of other Yemeni women. She's very, very strong about that. And every time she's been attacked since then, and she's been attacked all the time, spat at in the street, had her tyres slashed, called a whore and a slut just for driving a car in Manchester. She has made that commitment once again, and she makes that commitment every day. And I believe the Convention honours women such as Diana in the true sense of the word. I hope it says that we hear her cry and women like that, and that's the challenge. Thank you.
Grazie. Thank you. I'd like to thank Catherine Cormay for having told us these stories of great bravery. And we are talking about stories that help us understand how difficult it is to raise your head in certain settings and circumstances and go against customs. So thank you. Really, we would like to express our gratitude to journalists who tell us these stories of great resilience. And the Convention of Istanbul can give us those tools that are still lacking in some legal systems. And here we are in this session that is entitled Setting the Scene from Victimhood to Empowerment. Now, if there is a person who has translated a very dramatic story into something very positive for her own life, her own existence, then that person is Lucia Annibali, and she's sitting here next to me. Lucia is a clear example of the ability that people can have to transform something very dramatic into something that is extremely useful for others. Lucia Annibali is a lawyer. One day she returned home. Someone was in her flat. She understood that there was something dangerous was happening. She realized it, but immediately someone threw acid on her face. Acid destroyed the tissues of her face. After this incident, she had to heal her face and to heal her soul, and she did so in the most extraordinary way, because she decided to write a book on what happened, and the title is "I Am Here: My Story of No Love," and she followed this episode. And we also have a journalist here who followed this episode, and the relationship developed into a great friendship and then a book. And so now we have with us both the lawyer and the journalist, Lucia and Giusy, and they will tell us about this experience and their work together in producing this book. I'm here, io ci sono. Thank you, President Boldrini, and thank you all. Thank you for this opportunity that you are offering us in this event. Now, those who have taken the floor before us have emphasized the fact that it's important to give a voice to those who do not have a voice, to women who are living lost lives, who are living lives that have been sacrificed, lives sacrificed in situations that they perhaps mistook for love, and they're living these stories in silence. We are here to tell these stories and to tell them as best we can. These stories need to be known, and the silence has to be broken. I had the great privilege and honor of meeting Lucia and telling her story, and her story is the story of stories in my professional life. But it's a story that has not only marked her life and my life, and I've become, in a way, her shadow. But it also has touched the lives of many other people who started writing to Lucia, who saw her as an example, and who, thanks to her witness, to her story, were able to find in themselves perhaps not all the courage they needed, but enough courage to do something for themselves. President Boldrini has already told the story. Lucia had acid thrown in her face. I'd like to give her the floor now to tell what happened, and then I'll come back and take it a little further and come to what really is the subject of our session: how to be active agents, how to transform victimhood to empowerment. Thank you for this invitation. It's a great honor for me to be here. As Josie said, as some may already have heard, April 16th last year, I was brutally attacked. Acid was thrown in my face, and my voice was totally destroyed by the acid, as was my hand. I tried to protect my face with my hand, and there too the tissues were totally destroyed. I became blind, completely blind. This acidification was actually the final step, the final phase of a totally mistaken relationship that had lasted years, in which day by day it destroyed my person, the person I was inside, my love for life, my love for myself, my self-confidence, even the thought that I was worth something, that I had a life to live. So the physical destruction was only the concluding note of these years of relationship. I had very deep third-degree burns, was taken to the center of Parma, where they deal with the victims or the people who have been badly burned. And then day by day, I started trying to rebuild myself physically, piece by piece, and I'm still on that path. Rebuilding my face was meant also rebuilding myself. My face is me today, perhaps more today than it ever was in the past, because this face that was totally destroyed and then rebuilt with a huge amount of sacrifice and work, and it was hard, and it was hard to relate to others. It was hard to show my face to others. But bit by bit, it has allowed me to build up my self-confidence, to realize and understand that with strength of will, you can do anything. You can go wherever you decide to go, and it's a life lesson I've learned. A great lesson of life. I paid a dear price for it, but freedom has no price. And to be free from fear, and to be free to be oneself, and to live one's life according to one's own deep beliefs and wishes has no price. It is the price of happiness. It's not true that your face determines your identity. I don't agree with that. Your face is not your identity. When some have said that my identity was wiped away, was cancelled. No, my identity, my real identity, emerged through that unspeakable wound, but which gave me my inner freedom in a way I could never have imagined. And today I work as a volunteer in this center that treats people who have been badly burned. I go there, I continue my treatment, but I also help with the other people who've been badly burned. Often their hands and arms are badly wounded. I help feed them. I keep them company. I sit beside them in their pain and suffering. I express in this way my generosity, and generosity is the greatest weapon we have against violence. Lucia, in this path to self-determination and to inner growth, gradually recognized the steps in this, we'll call it this non-love relationship that led her to the stage. There was a phase of falling in love. There was a story with a man, but she hadn't recognized the truth of this relationship. And it's a classical mistake. So many women have made this same mistake. She worked very hard on herself and her understanding, and she was able in the end to see those signals that she had not perceived, that she had not known how to read. Would you like to say something about that, Lucia? Yes, it happens slowly and gradually. When you meet people who are very disturbed, who have these very disturbing relationships, often you are at a loss. They're very strange dynamics. They're not the sort of relational dynamic that you are used to, or that you've been educated to live when you have healthy relationships. It becomes hard to understand what is happening, who you're dealing with. And there may be a very deep and intense emotional investment, and the bond between the victim and the perpetrator of the violence becomes very deep, and it's very hard to leave it. And what I have seen is that there's a need to work on yourself, to fill that void. That means that we fall victim. We fall into the trap, but we have to have that strength to be able to walk away, to win back our love for life, because these relationships really destroy anything positive that there may be. Just one more point. When Lucia started becoming a symbol in Italy, a widely recognized personality, she's now a symbol for women who are trying to emerge from the cloak of silence. She has started receiving loads of correspondence, letters, emails. She receives letters from very young girls who need this self-awareness. They need to understand their bodies, their limitations. And it's quite extraordinary to see how they listen to her. We have events, meetings. We meet school children. We talk about the book. The convention also mentions the importance of taking this material to schools, to having these campaigns, and Lucia has met these young girls and teenagers very often, and she has often been able to shed great light on things that may appear to be even small things, but really are very significant in the lives of these people. Yes, that's true. I do receive lots of mail letters from people who have read my book, my story of non-love, and who after having read the book, have left their husband or left their partner. And I've also read many letters from young girls who've left their boyfriends, and they were able to become brave enough to leave this relationship. And unfortunately, these are patterns that are repeated, and the dynamics are always the same. And there's so many women who are enmeshed in these very sad relationships of lack of love, of the opposite of love. I received an email just last night, very long letter, and I read it. I wanted to see what the end was, and the end was simply thank you for the bravery that she was able to glean from my book, and she was able to live too, and deal appropriately with her bad relationship. And so this pain and suffering that I have lived means something. It's given meaning to my life, and it can have a positive impact on the lives of others. It can do something to to improve their lives. If violence can be curbed, constrained, and then experienced, and if pain and suffering can be lived with grace, even gratitude, it can become a great multiplier of humanity. I would like to thank Lucia Annibali for these words that are so emotional and have such a powerful impact on those who listen to her. It's really easy to understand how important she has become as a symbol for so many women, especially young women. And we would like to thank also Giusy, the journalist, who's done a little more than simply being a journalist, has become a friend and a support to Lucia in this journey through her life. Before handing over to the next session, I would like to thank the many members of Parliament I see here today in this hall. Many have been working for years now on gender-related issues. Many have done groundbreaking work. I thank them for that, and I thank them for continuing. And I'd like to thank the members of the delegation, the women and the men, and Michele Nicoletti, the chair of the committee, for the work that they're continuing to do. And I would like to thank all the many delegations who have reached us from afar and honored us with your presence. Unfortunately, I have to leave this conference now, but the proceedings continue. I'm quite sure that we will find a new approach, we'll find new momentum, and we will encourage more and more countries to become signatories. So thank you. I'd like to thank Director Morten Kjørum, our journalist and friend Catherine Cormbing, and I hope to be able to meet you all again sometime very soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming.
Io ce l'ho dietro,
Adesso rimane Francesco magari, che noi sta volendo intervento.
comunque secondo me non ha senso che lo rengo io, io lo porterei qua.
Lascialo qui.
Se serve lo usano, se no.
Faccio una telefonata, aspettate un attimo. 9, 8, 6, 1. La chiavetta?
Facciamo direttamente da qua?
Si fa direttamente da qua.
Magnifico.
Si gestisce con voi, diciamo solo alla regia di mandarle.
L'audio, ovviamente.
Facciamo un minuto per provare.
Ci vuole solo l'audio. Poi però bisogna farlo vedere.
Sì, pronto, sono ancora qui. Siamo qua, non so se ci vede. Allora, il dottor Contri ha messo la sua presentazione e funziona. Si chiedeva per mandarla su cose per l'audio. E glielo passo così si mette d'accordo?
Pronti? Sì. No, durante. Ma me lo posso gestire io? No, ma io ho solo uno spot e una slide, non c'è problema. Gestisco di qua, l'unica cosa è che si sente l'audio e si veda. Adesso io sullo schermo ce l'ho. Ah, sì, per piacere. No, quando lo chiamo. Ma lo mando io, sono qui al podio. Vogliamo... Sì, ma è già così. Ah. Va bene? Ok, e poi dopo questo...
Again. So please have a seat so that we can start this panel of discussion. We will start in 1 minute. Thank you very much. See. Okay. So I think I will start. I hope that in the meantime more people will approach here. I will shift in Italian at this first part because our first guest is Italian like I am. First of all, I introduce myself. My name is Maria Gianniti. I'm working for RAI from the Italian State Radio. Usually I'm following issues related to the foreign affairs, but what we are discussing today is also related to foreign affairs because we have this wonderful public that is coming from all around the world, I can say. In this panel, we are going to focus on the implementation of the convention, so which are the means to implement what we have discussed in the first part. So how is important to make sensibilization of the public, how is important to make training of the people that have to talk with the victims and not only with the victims, which are the tools that in all the different countries are used in order to implement the convention. And because of the fact that, of course, now the violence of women, but the gender violence is considered a violation of human rights. So to have an overview, and in this it will help a person of the Human Rights Watch, that is one of the organizations that most follows the violation of human rights. And then we will talk about violence in the, how is proposed and suggested in the media, and we will do this with the journalists. But first we start with the sensibilization of the public. Now I will shift in Italian, so you can use your headphones to have the translation. And I want to introduce our first guest of this panel, that is Alberto Contri. Alberto Contri
is president of the Pubblicità Progresso Foundation in Italy, which organizes awareness building campaigns. So let's see what's been done in our country in this area. Good morning. Pubblicità Progresso, I'm saying this for a foreign guest, a foundation which for 43 years has been attempting to contribute to solve civil, educational, moral problems in the country through social campaigns. On a number of occasions, the President of the Italian Republic, Giorgio Napolitano, has said that Pubblicità Progresso is an excellent example how Italy can provide well-founded reasons for appreciation at the international level because it's a unique case worldwide. Why is it unique worldwide? Because it's the only association which has inside it advertising investors, advertising buyers, mass media, internet editors, press editors, and research, social research institutions, and self-governing advertising institute. We do a campaign a year, and sometimes after having, and we were asked to do one on the campaign against violence against women. After having started to work, we realized that social campaigns against violence aren't very useful because violence is only the last stage of a process which starts from a long way behind, and which has its root in the failure to respect gender equality. If we can't, if the thought that women are objects or inferior is still prevalent in society, any attempt to act further down the cycle is something which raises some reaction, but doesn't really make many changes, and therefore we decided to organize a campaign which would work upstream to try and stamp out prejudices and stereotype, to try and cure the evil at the root. Together with Young and Rubicam, we carried out an experiment. At some bus stops we put up posters with photos of women who in cartoon in a cartoon format expressed incomplete thoughts, such as at work, I would like to, on the street, I would like to, and from the institutions, I would like, and we were going to see if people were going to complete these phrases with sexist sentences. There was a concealed camera which showed us that a lot of people who were willing to write their sexist thoughts openly on the street. And so in a video to point this out, we filmed the least vulgar comments, because there are a lot of vulgar ones which we couldn't show on TV. And I'm going to show you this video now. This is what happened. At work, I'd like to be under the desk. What I ask from the institutions is an iron. Women can't express themselves at 100% to overcome prejudice, so I'm counting on you. So this was the campaign video. I ought to translate for the guests what the content was. Some of them were quite vulgar. Said, at work I'd like to be under the desk. That's something we can say. From the institutions I'd like to have an iron. But on the street I'd like to be screwed. And things like this. We also need to bear in mind that these was also shown before the cut-off time, so we had to be very careful what we could show. It was just to show that we haven't reached parity. It's not true that in our society women are equal to men, and in particular those who criticized this campaign, we were saying, is it possible that nobody's asking which schools produce the kids writing these things, or the men writing these things, and which families produce the people writing these things? Second part of the campaign was to create a portal which is called I Rely on You, I'm Counting on You, Punto su di te, which is a very complex and comprehensive process, because the first part of the portal at the top is explained that in Italy any citizen can report a case to the Instituto di Autodisciplina if he considers that there's a sexist ad. They can download the report form, and you can report that sexist ad, and it will be removed within the space of a week. And so this means that women can not just complain, but they can act and do something concrete in specific cases. This is a sexist ad. I want you to remove it, and it's placed to report it to the institute, and within a week it's removed. Another thing which is important below, and a portal is a database where anybody can find subjects such as work, family, violence, and all the institutions, all the associations, organizations which can help women in those areas. If you live in Abbiate Grasso near Milan, you may have a problem with children reporting violence or schooling their children, and you can find an association which can help you. And there's also a playlist with the most interesting social campaigns worldwide, which we've taken from our library, which covers more than 2,500 campaigns. And you can see what is done worldwide, also by corporate producers, not just organizations, associations, but also companies who are acting on the basis of CSR. And there are a lot of companies like L'Oreal which are conducting gender equality campaigns. And there's also a press report and articles which have come out that day about women, and then also a survey of articles or essays which have been published during the week. People might read different newspapers, and we have all the we follow all the articles which are produced, as well as books and films. And every week we have 5 associations which are covered doing things for women. Futuro Femminile Bollini Rosa, and we do that on a rotating basis so that we can disseminate all this information on what civil society is doing in order to reach gender parity. There are a lot of initiatives which are unconventional too. For example, we had a competition for authors under the Italian Copyright Association. 200 authors took part in this initiative, where to produce a video where 30 women singers sing, and 30 women male singers, and vice versa, singing this song, I Count on You. And in 2015, we intend to organize a major concert with the participation of all these singers, with the aim of raising funds for scholarships for young people who find it difficult to complete their education. So we're not trying to just create a shockwave, but to do something which is concrete. And we've also got a number of workshops and seminars in order to invite people to promote scientific studies where women are particularly effective. Obviously, it's not enough to have a 30-second video to change stereotypes. There's a very long process involved over a long time. And we have a number of competitions where we have contacts with 85 departments in 44 universities, and we ask undergraduates to produce social marketing projects and attribute prizes to the best. Because we don't just have physical violence, which is something which is deplorable, but which comes after a whole range of other types of violence on women, which are less visible. The fact that women earn 20–30% less than men, the fact that women are underrepresented, about 30% less than men in enterprises and institutions and in decision-making places, and the fact that more than 30% of women leave their jobs when they have their first child. So combating this 30% curse and to reach gender parity is a basic issue, and this is the way which we identified in order to combat or to try to uproot the persuasion, which is still widespread in society, that women can be the victims of violence because they're objects or that don't have the equal dignity to men in all fields.
Grazie.
Thank you, Alberto Conti. Very interesting, because in order to change stereotypes, we need to have an information campaign. But since in this panel, we'd really like to understand how to change people's mindsets and how we can change language too. So we've been speaking of how important it is to put the content of the convention into practice, and one essential thing is training and education. And we have with us to speak of this Marceline Naudi, a social worker from Malta, who will be talking to us about the fundamental aspects. She's concentrated on Article 15 of the convention, where training is discussed.
Grazie, io parlo inglese. So I have been asked specifically to speak about Article 15 of the Convention. And this Article 15 talks about appropriate training for professionals. I've been asked to speak for 5 minutes, but I could speak for 2 hours just on this article. So I'm going to try to be as short, as brief as possible. So appropriate. So I'm going to talk about the training which I believe is appropriate and necessary, and that should be given to all relevant professionals who touch with the field of domestic violence. So we have had training in the field of domestic violence and violence against women generally for many years now, and this is reflected in many national action plans and CEDAW reports of most European states. However, many lobby groups, as well as NGO service providers, are still critical of the attitudes which are being displayed by some professionals that touch with the field of violence against women and domestic violence. And I would tend to agree. So we're talking about Europe-wide here. So we've had international agencies, of course, like the Council of Women and like the Council of Europe and the United Nations, who constantly emphasize that violence against women is the result of an imbalance of power between women and men, and that patriarchal culture is an important force in legitimizing the gender power inequalities. And we have heard this from almost every speaker so far this morning. However, most of the professionals in the field, like me and like lawyers and judges and police, indeed, and politicians, whether they're European or national politicians, most of the people in the field have in fact been brought up and still live in a patriarchal culture. And we just heard that very clearly from Mr. Conti just now, specifically about Italy, but it is the same in I would dare say, all of Europe. Now, this is sometimes displayed, the fact that they have been brought up and still live in this patriarchal culture, this is sometimes displayed in their actions and in their professional judgments. So as professionals. Because their actions and professional judgments reflect their attitudes, and their attitudes reflect the patriarchal culture that they have been brought up in. And indeed, the Article 15, which I have been asked to focus on, includes the necessity of training on equality between women and men for professionals. So we cannot assume that because people are professionals, then they've got this balance right that they have. Because they have been brought up, as all of us to this day still have been brought up, within a culture that does not really respect women fully, that still treats women as objects, as Mr. Conti was just saying before me. So, when we talk about appropriate training, we're not only talking about information giving, we're not only talking about the professionals having the right information. This is important and it is necessary. We're not even talking only about using the right terminology. Sometimes people talk about political correctness, and they say, like, you know, they try to use the right words rather than the words that used to be used before, and they think if they use the right words, then they're there, it's okay. Huh? This is also important, and it is courteous. But these are, although both are necessary, they are not sufficient in themselves. We need more. So the importance and the necessity that we also address the discriminatory traditions, the attitudes, the gender stereotypes when we are doing training, because the attitudes of the professionals will sometimes reflect the sexist attitudes which are found in the general population. Not because they are not good professionals, but because they have been brought up in the same society that teaches us these attitudes and these stereotypes. So even if we look at some CEDAW shadow reports, it shows the importance and the lack of training that incorporates attitudinal change and the effect that these attitudes can have. So even if we look at a shadow report of Italy in 2010, they stated that the deep-rooted patriarchal stereotypes embodied even by people who should protect women through the legal system often worsen women's access to justice. And I'm not picking on Italy. Similar statements were made in relation to Ireland, to Bulgaria, to Croatia, to the Netherlands, to Poland, to mention just a few. So here we are talking about people's personal attitudes, our personal attitudes, which are influenced by this dominant discourse, values, within which we are brought up and within which we live. And these personal attitudes affect our professional judgments, whether we like it or not. They will affect our professional judgments. We know each profession has its own professional knowledge and skills and values, but the interaction of lay knowledge, lay as in non-professional, the attitudes, etc., that we have learnt as we have grown up, it has a great effect on how professionals use that professional knowledge, on how professionals guide their practice. And this lay knowledge, this non-professional knowledge, these attitudes, it's often taken for granted knowledge. We don't think about it. Unless, Mr. Contri, I really liked your presentation, and I thought that the work that you're doing is excellent. So the sort of work that Mr. Contri is doing will be the sort of thing that will hopefully make us stop and think about our attitudes, which we have just absorbed as we were growing up. So these attitudes are often taken for granted. We do not usually stop to think about them, to reflect about them, or to change it. And so long as it remains so, then it will continue to affect our work, professionals' work, without professionals even being aware of it. And women will continue to be abused and not get the help they should get, and perpetrators will continue to perpetrate abuse with impunity. So what I'm suggesting is that we need to pull out from the background and place right in front of our faces, in the foreground, this taken for granted knowledge, the attitudes that we have been brought up with, because this affects our understanding of our clients and the situations which they are going through. So it requires us to explore the prejudices that we bring to the encounter and to accept the possibility of change in our own assumptions and prejudices in relation to our own traditions. So we need to become aware of the effect of the dominant discourse within which we were brought up, not only on our clients, but primarily and significantly on ourselves. What effect has this had on me, being brought up in this way, in this tradition, in this country, with these values? And we need to be able to question these ourselves. So, we need to be able to identify and acknowledge where we are coming from, and we need to be able to move outside of our cultural comfort zone. Many of the people who work in this field come to this field with a wish to do good, to help others. These values, however, are often based on our dominant cultural values within our societies and do not necessarily fit neatly with a gender-based perspective. However, this initial motivation to help and to do good should help us in persuading us to attempt to create more change within ourselves. Change starts with us. So, we are all brought up in certain ways, with certain gender role models. Maybe our mother did most of the housework. Maybe we dreamt as little girls that we needed a prince. Maybe our father was the unchallenged head of the household. Maybe we were taught at school that men have to be strong, that they cannot cry. These are ideas that when we were young, they made sense when we were younger, in the past. But many of us still carry them around with us, here, in the background of our minds. And these will continue to affect how we as professionals, we as people, as societies, view women and men, how we view their roles, and the way that we make professional judgments. Lost. Last quote. Foucault said, "My role is to show people that they are much freer than they feel, that people accept as truth, as evidence, some themes that have been built up at a certain moment during history, and that this so-called evidence can be criticized and destroyed. To change something in the minds of people, that's the role of an intellectual," said Foucault. I would say it's also the role of an activist, it's also the role of a social worker, it's also the role of a politician, it's also the role of all of us here. So, let's do it.
Grazie. Grazie, Marceline. Thank you. Thank you, Marceline. That was extremely helpful. We have people here who've come from many different cultures, and so it can be very difficult for us to find a common thread, to find something that will sound right for all of the different countries. And it means that we really have to work in depth and work in all of our different contexts, which we all here represent. Thank you, Marceline. And now we'll take one step further in this session, which we're trying to understand how countries can try to help other countries. And that is an example. We have an example of that here with Norway. We have the State Secretary to the Minister for EEA Affairs and EU Relations, Norway. And we will hear about what Norway has done, working in cooperation with other European countries. And it was very interesting in our opening session to hear, of course here I'm speaking as a European, an Italian, we always consider Scandinavian countries to be a model for us. And yet we've heard that these are countries that have, beginning to have very many problems in this area too. But Norway, like the other Scandinavian countries, has a social welfare state that can help and that is unknown in other contexts. And Norway has decided to help out other countries, to be at their service. And so now I'd like to hear exactly what Norway has in mind in this area.
Thank you. Allow me to begin first by congratulating the Council of Europe and all of the countries that have ratified this groundbreaking convention. And I'd especially like to thank and congratulate the government of Turkey for their leadership on this issue. Norway, unfortunately, is yet to ratify this convention, but we are preparing legislative proposals that would enable us to implement the convention that we hope to table early next year. So we are coming up behind you. So how do we change mindsets? Well, I think the key is that violence against women and domestic violence must be discussed and acknowledged. And as always, women's problems must be everyone's problems. And while we have not, as I said, ratified the convention ourselves, we are very proud to be able to support the efforts of many other countries in implementing the convention. We do this through something called the EEA and Norway grants, which have been set up with contributions from Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein to promote social and economic cohesion in Europe as part of our participation in the European Economic Area. For the period 2009 to 2014, we have pledged 1.8 billion euros to reducing social and economic disparities in the 14 newest EU member states, as well as Spain, Portugal and Greece. There are 150 different programs, ranging from green innovation to civil society and justice sector reform. 25 million euros will be allocated to programs addressing gender-based violence in 11 beneficiary states: Bulgaria, Cyprus, Czech Republic, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Slovakia and Spain. I would like to mention just a few of the programs that we are supporting to provide some examples. In Romania, the project Joint Action Against Domestic Violence provides training for 300 professionals, including law enforcement, prosecutors and judges. The goal is to improve how cases of domestic violence and discrimination are handled in the justice system. The Council of Europe is a partner in this project. In the Czech Republic, the organisation White Circle for Safety will provide the country's first free-of-charge helpline for victims of gender-based violence. The NGO Elulin in Tallinn, Estonia, is improving services for victims of trafficking. They are establishing a shelter as well as a rehabilitation centre with funds from Norway. Self-help groups have been created, as well as a support programme for victims who have children. In Slovakia, the Council of Europe is an important partner in the establishment of the Coordinating Methodical Centre for the Prevention and Elimination of Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence. The centre will operate in line with the Istanbul Convention's recommendations. This €2 million project also includes developing a guide for prevention, launching national awareness-raising campaigns, and the training of professionals. So, in total, the efforts to combat and tackle gender-based violence through the EEA and Norway grants range from victim support, including shelters, counselling services, helplines and legal aid, to awareness-raising campaigns, advocacy work and research. Police officers, judges and other professionals are being trained in how to better approach victims and deal with cases of gender-based violence. All of these are just a snippet of the numerous projects, large and small, that are currently being implemented throughout the beneficiary states in an effort to prevent and tackle gender-based violence. As the examples, I hope, have illustrated, the Council of Europe is also an important and valued partner in the implementation of the EEA and Norway grants. They are directly involved in 4 of our programs on gender-based violence, and the Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, which entry into force we are gathered to celebrate here today, provides crucial guidance and direction for our programs as well as our numerous projects. As we enter into the planning stages for a new round of funding, domestic and gender-based violence remains firmly on our agenda, and we will build on our experiences from this period to strengthen and intensify our efforts in this field. Thank you so much.
Grazie. Thank you. We see many different pieces coming together here now. And this is a celebration that we're holding here today, a celebration of the Convention, But the more we talk about it, the more we realize that there's work to be done and many more aspects we have to take into account, because also of the great diversity of the countries represented here. Our next speaker is Gauri van Gulik from Human Rights Watch. And we would like to have now a sort of trans-European outlook. There are countries that need to be encouraged to ratify the convention. And as Under-Secretary Stubb said, there are countries that are ready to do so and that are doing the necessary legislative work to be able to ratify. Let's have a picture now of what has been done so far. And our next speaker, Gulik, will help us understand where the new focus needs to be. I would like to conclude our tour de table here, but then we also would like to open up the floor to hear reactions from the participants. You have the floor.
Oh, sorry. Does this work? Yes, excellent. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to the Council of Europe for having us here. This is quite a moment. I think we can all take a breath, celebrate, and then get right back to work. We are delighted that this convention exists, that it exists in the shape it is in, that it is being ratified, and I expect and hope many others will follow suit. We're going to work hard on that, and that we're going to see strong monitoring, of course, of the convention. There's a lot of work ahead of us. For those of you who don't know Human Rights Watch, I'll sort of summarize us in 3 words. We are an international global human rights organization. We investigate human rights violations around the world. We expose those violations so that they don't happen in the dark. And finally, we work to change them through strategic advocacy. And you know, while wars in Iraq, in Gaza, in Ukraine, etc., you know, justifiably grab the attention, there is a daily war happening in every home where this kind of violence is taking place. And that is something, I want to stress the urgency of it. You've heard many times the statistics. We're talking about 1 in 3 women in the European Union, who suffer this type of violence, who suffer physical, sexual violence, and 35% of the world's women suffer this type of violence. So incredible numbers. But what is perhaps more relevant for our work is not so much the violence itself, but how governments deal with this violence. You know, governments are not any different in terms of you know, the fact that violence happens. It happens everywhere. Every country in the world, including in Europe, in Western Europe, everywhere. But what sets governments apart is, of course, how they handle it, how they prevent it, how they work to end violence, how they protect women and girls. And that's really what we focus on. So what's worse than just the violence is the fact that a lot of those women and girls cannot rely on the police to help them. They cannot rely on social services to help them. They don't have access to the right groups. And so those are the issues that we need to focus on for now. So, you know, the stats are important and they're very broad. It's actually hard to grasp. But, you know, we learn a lot from just talking to individual women. We saw that at the last panel. But also in our research, not just because we are interested, of course, to hear the voice of the victims, of the survivors, but also because they genuinely teach us what needs to be improved. What, you know, and this convention is largely based, in a sense, ultimately, on their stories, their input. And so I just want to give one example. I give this case, you know, I've spoken to hundreds of women and girls who suffered through domestic violence. I've done research in many countries in this region, including Turkey and Hungary and Belgium and other parts. So like my colleague Marceline, I'm not picking on any country, but this woman I met in a shelter close to Budapest, she's called Livia. And I don't pick this particular case because it is the most gruesome I've ever seen. it's horrible, but it is important because it shows so many problems in a system that can happen. So very briefly, she's a woman, she's now 38, she was 37 when we spoke. She has 3 young kids, and she ultimately suffered 14 years of abuse, and often on a daily basis. So she would describe severe beatings, overall controlling of movement, of behavior, horrible incidences with a knife, and many other problems. And what's important is over 4 years, she tried to reach out to the police. So she spent 4 years, as she said it, hiding in the toilet, basically. Every time this would happen, she would hide in the toilet, call the police. Now, the first couple of times, nothing happened, no one came. Another time, she called, the police came, and they asked him what happened. And he denied it, and they left again. Another time, she managed to call them again. They came over, they asked her what happened, but in front of him. So, of course, she couldn't tell the truth. She wasn't able to talk about it. Finally, she was threatened by a knife again, and she genuinely, I mean, the way that she described it to me was, I was sure I was going to die. So she tried one more time. She called the police. They came over to the house. They even witnessed him slapping her in front of the police. And they told her, unless blood flows, there's nothing we can do. And it's a quote we heard over and over again. Unless blood flows, there's nothing we can do. Now, she very poignantly said to us, you know, what is the point? And it sums it up. What is the point? What's the point of going to the police when you don't get help? What is the point? And what she also said, which resonated with me, was, I managed to call the police. What happens to those women who can't even reach that point? So I'm not telling the story again because of the, the suffering, which is horrendous, but it's about changing mindsets, being much more practical than just sort of the broad awareness raising that we often talk about. It's crucial, and the work of my colleagues here is incredibly important. What we focus on is slightly more, it's more concrete within the government, actually. The mindsets that need to change within governments, the laws that need to change. And I mean, just imagine this case, Livia's case, and then imagine the police knowing about the laws of their own country, for example. Imagine that it would go without saying that they would separate her, for example, when they question her. Imagine that they would fully understand and appreciate that violence doesn't have to mean blood flowing, that violence can be very serious without any blood, in fact, without even physical violence. And imagine social services working with the police to help her and the kids build a new life, find a way out, rather than threatening to take the kids away, which happened to happen in this case. And then imagine prosecutors. This case never went to court. Imagine prosecutors prioritizing this issue, domestic violence, seeing it as the huge cost it has to society, not just financial, but in many other ways. And then, once that is in place, once the system works, imagine men realizing, having a well-founded fear of the consequences. If they do beat, stab, slap, harass, control their wives and girlfriends, that's when you're going to see shifts. And the Istanbul Convention plays a very important role here, and we are, as a group, using it left, right, and center in countries all over this region. First of all, it says very clearly what responsibilities governments have, and of course many of these basic responsibilities and obligations already exist in international law, but we don't have to construct it. We don't have to piece it together. It's very clear in this document, and it is a very helpful one. And secondly, it's like a checklist. Very often we get the excuse from governments, well, of course, in principle, yes, but what do we actually do? What do we have to do exactly to tackle this? It's hard to know. Is it cultural, working? No, here's a checklist. Here's a clear set of obligations. And so it's a very helpful document in that sense. And as we see more ratifications, we see the pressure on governments to ratify increase. And I think that's really crucial, and it has to continue. We have to keep this momentum going. I cannot stress it enough. I mean, we have to keep this moving. We have to make sure that every regional government here ratifies it and that it moves outside the borders of the Council of Europe. And finally, to say, of course, groups like ours, as well as other non-governmental organizations, have a big role to play continuing this work. So for us, in terms of advocacy, of documenting the problems that still exist, not letting certain governments get away with claiming that it's fine, and pushing and working constructively to change these laws and systems. But also other groups who are service providers, who do trainings, who run shelters. There are many non-governmental groups who also play a role in this. So to wrap up, the Istanbul Convention for allies in governments is a weapon, is a tool, is a way to convince their colleagues that this is crucial, that we can end violence against women. For us, for organizations, it's a way to hold countries to account, hold governments to account, say this is what you are obliged to do and now let's do it. And finally, of course, ultimately for women, this convention, I truly believe, is going to be a lifesaver. So I hope we continue the momentum. Thank you all very much for being here, and thank you, and I look forward to your discussion here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. It's important to understand the situation. Gary mentioned the emergency and the growing levels of violence. Is this happening because there's more tension now? It's emerging more? Something that used to be sort of submerged, concealed, is being talked about more? Is that what's happening? Or instead, are the actual levels of violence increasing? We need to give some thought to that. And another question is, how important is the communication on this? In mass media, press, TV, radio. How is this subject dealt with? Our next speaker is Luisa Betti. She's a journalist. She's been working on women's issues now for many, many years. And a question to her will be, how has language changed, and what is still lacking? What is missing in our narrative on these stories of violence? I'm quite sure the whole subject of stereotypes will emerge again. Thank you. Yes, let's follow on what the word you just used, which is stereotypes, and let's try to focus on the cultural aspects. This is a session that is dedicated to changing mindsets about violence against women. To change a mindset, one has to deal with the culture at the basis. How do we change the culture on women, and how do we get to the roots of the discrimination against women, which derives from the stereotypes? And the first stereotype is, of course, that women are worth less than men. It's obviously not easy. We are imbued from early childhood with this approach. Women didn't make history, we know from our history books. We may have grown up in families where the males are privileged with respect to the females, or we may live in countries that are used to going down the streets and having unwanted compliments or attitudes and behaviors expressed towards us, and it's considered to be almost normal. We have to understand how this all affects us. Go back to the roots and understand how it can be changed. 7 out of 10 women are subject to some form of violence throughout the world. In 600 million women live in countries where this is not really considered to be an offense at all. And we know, however, that there has been a growing attention, growing focus on violence against women in different fora, and some common points have emerged. March 2013, the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women came to its findings, its conclusive document, and said that violence is closely linked to gender stereotyping. And we know that from the Convention of Istanbul that reaching gender equality, de jure and de facto, is a key element to prevent violence against women. We know, for instance, that number of experts in November 2012, including Diana Russell, Michelle Bachelet, Rashida Manjoo, concluded that femicide is the ultimate form of violence against girls and women, and the roots of femicide, of killing women, are to be found in the historically unequal power relations between women and men. And the roots of violence against women know no borders. They'll be found in different ways, but in all cultures, all countries, and acknowledgement of fundamental rights is essential to deal with the whole issue of violence against women. So this is shared by all. There's now a common understanding on the fact that stereotypes are really the drivers of violence. But what to do about it? The Convention of Istanbul highlights the areas of prevention and protection, even before repression, and it clearly points out that the cultural aspect are what matters more. You can have the very best laws in place, but if you don't change the mindset, laws can be badly implemented, not implemented at all, or indeed implemented in ways that are totally distorted. So let's now emphasize the underestimation of violence, and it cuts both ways. You can deal with violence against women, but if you're going to deal with it all round in a full way, you have to know what you're touching on, because underestimating the importance of violence against women can actually be harmful. It can expose women to even more violence, and it can re-victimize women. And this has been clearly pointed out in the Convention of Istanbul. This must be avoided at all costs. Now, here, of course, we come to the subject of information. To deal with this structural phenomenon, which isn't just an expression of a crisis, an emergency, but it's structural, and there's a need for a cultural change. If it were just a temporary crisis, we wouldn't need this cultural change, which we do need. All of this will require serious survey work, serious monitoring of what is being done by institutions to combat, to restrain violence. But the narrative around it is equally important, because a distorted narrative through mass media reaching millions upon millions of users can be extremely harmful, extremely damaging, and not only give a distorted perception, but it can also lead to an underestimation and exposure and re-victimization of women through the mass media themselves. The Convention of Istanbul, and indeed a number of recommendations of the United Nations addressed towards Italy, really underscore the role of the mass media. The Convention says clearly that respecting freedom of expression, there's a need for the implementation of policies and guidelines and codes of self-regulation in the mass media. Now that sounds good, but it's very important to make distinctions among the different types of media. You may have advertising, you may have fiction, but you also have the news coming from the press, TV programs, and even specific programs on the subject, on women, and they all are very different, and often they're passed off as sort of being impartial, objective information on the issue. But if this information is not being given in the correct way, then anything that is read, any account that is read in the newspaper, will be taken as being confirmed, as being acceptable. But it can also be the vehicle of extremely harmful information or presentation of the situation. Let me give you some practical examples to explain what I mean. 2006, 2007, we had the publication of the first Istat data, that's our national statistics body in Italy, and it reported that 80% of the cases of violence were domestic violence, and the perpetrators were the male members of the Italian family, the husbands, the fiancés, or current or rejected partners. And yet, in the newspaper accounts, there were huge stories of rape or killing of women by immigrants, whereas the stories of women being killed in a context of domestic violence were often not told simply. Or if they were, it was done using the usual stereotypes. It was a raptus, it was a case of a mental problem, jealousy, a passionate crime, economic issues. All of this was presented as a sort of attenuating circumstances, and the victim was described as if she had actually sought out the danger herself. And there was a report called the Shadow Report presented by this CIDAO platform in New York 2011 by Italian NGOs, and it said that the media often present the perpetrators of femicide as victims of raptus or homicidal folly, and generating in public opinion the false idea that women were being killed by people who were suffering from some psychological problems or were suffering some outbreak of aggressivity. But in the last 5 years, fewer than 10% of the cases of femicide were actually committed because of psychiatric problems or other pathologies, and fewer than 10% were due to arguments or problems linked to economic or work-related problems. So it's just attributed to some form of raptus or violent crisis. But this was not the case at all. Now, there has been in recent years a mobilization of women, women's associations, civil society, many journalists on their own, lawyers, women judges to members of the judiciary sat round the table and started to reason about the problem, and pushed very hard, by the way, also for the ratification of the Istanbul Convention. And they also started working on the media. They started tackling this subject, but it was very difficult because there's another the editors of Italian newspapers, all the important media are men, all the people who matter, the people who count, are all men in the world of mass media. So it was by no means easy. But a lot of work was done to enhance awareness, to also train some women journalists, and to, in this way, give a different dimension to this narration on violence against women. To not have possibly male reporters report these cases, to not have these cases presented as a sort of gory bit of news that was being told to titillate the readership. But and we started introducing terms like femicide, trying to give some meaning to what was happening, to what lay behind these stories. This started catching on, and the fact that this was this called for training, education of communicators, of people working in the area of mass media, led even to perhaps at times excessive presentation of the cases. And gradually, unfortunately, the level of the reporting started declining. There was this word of femicide, and it was interpreted in Italy as being meaning simply the killing of wives, and it was seen as an opportunity to be able to sort of have a personal scoop, to tell a story that would be read. So the word hadn't been well explained, and then it was sort of relegated, pushed aside, and there was a lack of in-depth presentation of the cases. Very superficial TV programs, very superficial accounts, and a sort of morbid attention going into the details. The thing that's not what we wanted. It's not what was important for us. So instead of going forward, unfortunately, we went backwards. And it's also important for us to reflect on that, why it happened, why we had this backlash, and do we really want to implement this convention, or are we just playing at it? And we saw ourselves falling back, our media falling back into these stereotypes. This summer, for instance, as there were some sort of conspicuous cases of women being killed in July, August, and September, we had the newspapers once again speaking about homicidal folly, the raptors. The offenders were described in extremely improbable ways. Nice man, good father. He did knife his daughter to death, but who could have imagined such a nice man slaughtering his daughter? A 20-year-old young man threw his former girlfriend from the 7th floor because she had left him. But he was such a nice boy, such a nice family, such a nice kid. We have to be careful here. And the women who are killed just disappear. They're not, you have the name, the age, that's it, finished. No account of the women. This is a re-victimization of women who are victimized by the mass media in this case. And it also means that we are re-victimizing the victims of violence. It means we're killing twice. We're murdering women who have already been murdered. And so all of these ingredients, the sex behind it, the violence, the blood, the gore, all of that is not only, we believe, profoundly misplaced, but after all the work we've done and the path we've come down, we begin to see it as an expression of actual bad will. Because before it could have been the fact that, well, we were unaware of it. We hadn't thought about it. But now we've been talking about it so much, till exhaustion. So now there needs to be the will to go to the roots of this and deal with it in a much more reasonable way, an enlightened way. So I'll conclude by saying that the guidelines are definitely an instrument, but they need to be drafted, these guidelines, by people who really have specific knowledge and who really know how newspapers, how the media work. There are all sorts of dynamics inside the media and the papers, and if you don't have first-hand experience of it, you don't know how it works. You have to understand what can work, what cannot work. But it's also imperative to have the right training, because there's another stereotype too. Violence against women, discrimination, gender-based discrimination, and gender issues are considered to be definitely a second-category subject. So journalists, you have specialized journalists working in culture, the economy, but anyone will write an article about women and give their opinions. You can say anything about women. What do you care? Who's the specialist in women's affairs? It's unimportant, so just about anything can be said or written about women. That's got to come to an end. And we hope that besides the specialized papers we have, the blogs we have, we want to see this area be dealt with by the newspaper with specialized journalists who are knowledgeable and trained and know what is the right approach and can avoid this re-victimization, this repeat victimization of women that reaches millions of readers or viewers. This is an important way to bring about the change in mindsets. This can really give us a new forward momentum in our work.
I would have liked to have another set of comments and but I think we're running out of time, and so I want to leave some time for the people to make comments on the floor. I'd like to take advantage of being the chair to ask a very rapid question to Marceline, who works with these issues on a daily basis. How much of this greater awareness has led, it's not so much an emergency, but we're now dealing with a structural issue. In actual fact, we have a submerged issue which is now coming up to the surface. Or is there, in your opinion, an actual increase in this kind of issue?
Sì, bene. I would think, I'm going to answer in English, I would think that it is mainly that people are coming forward more to report rather than a general increase, whereas before people were more silent and were more accepting of violence. They are now less so, and that is something good in more ways than one. It is good because people are coming forward, although, as again mentioned by Gauri before me, by coming forward it doesn't mean that their problem is solved, because sometimes it is not dealt with appropriately. But if they are coming forward and something is being done about it, then it encourages more people to come forward and try to get help. So silence will be decreasing.
Grazie mille. So I would like to ask questions to the participants of the panels. It will be a pleasure. So I will ask each of you, of course, to introduce yourself, please. Please.
We need to stand up or just speak now? Thank you for opportunity to meet each other. I am member of parliament from Georgia and member of Committee of Not Discrimination from the Council of Europe. I have a question or proposal, both maybe. First of all, thank you for possibility to express our opinion about what? We are talking about gender equality and domestic violence. It is connected with each other. In this audience, we are very selected audience. Everybody know what is gender equality, what is domestic violence, but if you go out and ask ordinary citizens, what does it mean? I don't think that they know. Maybe domestic violence they know more or less, but what is gender equality? They cannot answer. And I think that the Istanbul Convention gives us possibility to change dramatically our education system. If you don't change our education system, of course, we need legislation, we need trained police, we need trained social worker, but general attitude towards the gender equality never will change if you don't put the appropriate content in gender education from the beginning, from kindergarten, from school. Because nowadays we worried if our children don't have normal skill in math or history or literature, but nobody cares and nobody worried if our children has a good skill of gender sensitive behavior. Yes, okay. And that's why we need to use the possibility. One is concrete action for implementation Istanbul Convention, but we need to use this possibility to force, to pressure our government, which signed Istanbul Convention, to change content of our education system. And after this, of course, it is not easy. It needs more resources, money, but if you spend more resources of gender education in kindergarten, school, with teachers, with parents, because they also have no idea sometimes what does it mean. And it's much more better, and we will have less cases of domestic violence in future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's very clear. Yes. Thank you. But more than a question, of course, it was an assignment to do something more. So please, gentlemen from Azerbaijan, of course, I ask you to introduce yourself. I will take also questions, of course, not only intervention, please. Yeah.
Okay.
Excuse me. I am representing a state committee for family, women and children affairs. It's some kind of well done work as a ratification of the convention and going into force. But today I want to give floor to the next point, that the main point from our side is implementation. Real implementation of this convention. I can give a good example from our side, that we had earlier bad experience with early marriage, child marriage, and we make the change in our legislation, code, criminal, and implement in the local areas, especially with the civil servants on the social protection, medicine, and other spheres, but in the local places. And it was one of the main points to make less early marriage 10 times in Azerbaijan during 1 year. It's very good experience and very good opportunity, because 4 years and 4,000 euros for the early marriage is a good responsibility that it makes quality work on it. It's why, from our point, it's the main problem in the work of such kind of legislations or conventions. I think it's not only the convention, the ratification, making it the special law. Part of the legislation of in the national countries. It's why one of the main problems what we got, it will be the implementational role. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry? Yeah, there are several hands that I see, please, and then we come in the front, please.
Thank you. I would like to know which is the role that civil society should play, and I would like to give the example of Italy. National Action Plan of Italy is end since 2013, and the next SNAP will be presented in October, as government announced. But civil society organization, the majority of women civil society organizations, are really disappointed regarding how government is proceeding in writing it. So we are really disappointed on procedure, transparency, content discussed, and decision taking regarding the NAP. So, which is the role of civil society? Because Battaini said before that silence is a duty in the past of women, but women civil society organizations now are not heard, so are again in silence, and this is a form of violence. So we really would like to know which is the role of civil society.
Allora, io mi fermerei un attimo, poi
Right, let's stop here with the questions. We've heard requests for legislative steps, and when we heard the statement from Azerbaijan, and that's very important. It's important to understand the role of civil society. So let's take these questions or statements and give our panelists the chance to respond. Would you like to answer that?
Thank you. I think I would like to pick up on the point made by the Georgian representative, first of all, and I think you're right that this is very intimately connected with gender equality in general. And I think, as I said in my introduction, women's problems are not a special case. Women's problems have to be everyone's problems. It's not, you sometimes get the feeling, and I think we all have grown up in a society where people are men and women are a special subset. And I think the key is to make women's problems everyone's problems. And that, I think, is intimately connected with increasing female participation in politics and decision-making in general. Just to provide an example from Norway, our new government is a centre-right government. Our Prime Minister is a woman. Our Finance Minister is a woman. Half of the ministers are women. The first common initiative by all of our coalition leaders in the centre-right coalition was, in fact, on combating domestic violence. That initiative was taken at a moment when temporarily all 4 party leaders were women. Now, the reason why that was a temporary situation was that the leader of the Christian Party, which is a coalition partner, was actually on paternity leave. So his female vice president was representing him. So I think you're very right that it is intimately connected with gender equality. And I think to the extent that women are equally represented in politics, problems like this will also be higher on the agenda. I think that is absolutely key. When it comes to the role of civil society, I think I would just make the general point that civil society is a central partner in developing good policy, and that in order to get good policy, I think it's important to listen to the voices and to the input of civil society. Thank you.
Grazie mille. Allora, sì.
Many thanks. So we're really running out of time. I'd like to take a couple of people here in front.
I'm very pleased that I'm here with you today, ladies and gentlemen, and I'd like to congratulate all of us for this, what we've done till now in promoting and ratifying the Istanbul Convention. My name is Ismeta Dervos, and I'm the member of the Parliamentary Assembly of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Also, I'm the member of the Committee for Equality and Non-Discrimination in the Council of Europe in the capacity of the first vice chair. I'd like to say that in my country, we are very proud and pleased that Bosnia and Herzegovina is the 6th country which ratified the Istanbul Convention. It was the excellent cooperation between governmental and non-governmental organizations, leading by our Agency for Equality and Non-Discrimination in the Ministry for Human Rights and our Committee for Equality in the Parliamentary Assembly. And this is very important cooperation between governmental and non-governmental institutions for promote and unlight all the situation which we need to be our common job and common work in the future. This, what I like to say is that my previous career was in journalism. I was the executive producer for radio and television, and I was working in the media. So I was very interesting and touched with this, what Madame Luisa said. I'd like to ask her, do you know that there is any actions, any plans, any initiatives to maybe organize some education for journalists, that we really has got one day the specialist for the woman issues and women rights, because this is very important, the same as the educations on Madam from Georgia talk about it. Also, I'd like to say that I congratulate all my colleagues from the Committee for Equality and Non-Discrimination of the Council of Europe. They did, leading by Mr. Mendes Bota, we did a great but still not finished job. So let's move it forward. Thank you very much.
Prego.
Grazie, parlerò.
Thank you. I'll be speaking Italian. I'm Edward Fines. I'm a Moroccan, Italo-Moroccan, really. I've been living in Italy and resident in Italy for 16 years. First of all, I would like to draw the attention of our colleagues to not separating the process of democratization from that of protecting citizens, particularly women. And I'm referring in particular to young democracies. On the southern shore of the Mediterranean. It's very important because it's a very important combination of guaranteeing citizens' rights, guaranteeing their access to basic rights and to education, and acting to change mindsets, changing cultural attitudes. I'm speaking as a Maghrebi, as an Arab, and as a Muslim. I'm very proud of the Moroccan experience, the first country which has ratified a number of conventions, the first Arab, African, Muslim country which has became a party to the mechanism to verify the respect of human rights and to combat violence against women. But we have to strive every day to ensure that there is implementation, because we need to embody the protection of women's rights in people's mindsets, in people's everyday behavior. And we need to, and in this way, we also need to strengthen institutions. And in the kind of atmosphere there is now in Morocco, it's we have an important quadrilogue between civil society and public institutions and the National Council for Human Rights, which has been just been established after the 2011 Constitution, following the protests of the Arab Spring and the civil society. This is very important for protection of human rights, and government involved in this quadrilogue. But this is a task. And here I'd like to put a basic question. How can one draw lessons as citizens, as members of parliament from the south of the Mediterranean, derive advantage from Europe, so as not to repeat mistakes which have been made, and create? Why don't we have a parliamentary platform to share our experiences? Because it's not a separate world. We're men and women beyond our cultures and religions. We're still talking about citizens who want independence, want work, health, access to fundamental rights. And so with platforms for work, for experience sharing, I think we can also combat terrorism with this kind of mechanism. That's the second point. Third point, how can one establish projects on the ground in order to help these women in practice, women on the ground who strive to have their rights, and also encourage an environment which is positive for women in culture and in education. So it's very important to have these practical initiatives. The most important thing is, of course, the implementation of conventions and laws and public policies on the part of governments. Well, I think this takes us back to the issue of cooperation between North and South of the Mediterranean, something which already exists, but which needs to be expanded and strengthened, also on the basis of what's happened in recent years in the south of the Mediterranean. We're really running out of time. I'd like to give the floor very rapidly to Luisa Betti to answer the question which was just asked by the representative of Bosnia-Herzegovina.
Ok. Allora, la formazione dei giornalisti, perché lo dico qua.
Training journalists isn't easy. It's true they tend to be a little haughty, a little arrogant. Male journalists who might be the editors, have important role in the newspaper, trying to tell them, suggest to them what they should do or not, doesn't usually get you anywhere. So guidelines, fine, Convention of Istanbul is fine, but you have to know what really happens behind the closed door. It's not that there isn't any discrimination against women in the newsroom. we know it's quite opposite. Women always have roles that are, certainly in Italy, roles of much lesser importance, minor roles compared to the men in Italy. So this is something we have to think about very carefully. Just simply taking note of reality. The training courses you mentioned are being organized, but there too, what quality are there? Who are the trainers? And here too, we don't usually or even often have objective criteria. In some cases, the training courses may be well structured, they'll deal with the issues. But as I said in my statement, they can also be extremely superficial. Because dealing with stereotypes and stereotypes in relation to violence against women and culture, it's not something easy. It's not that you just need a week to prepare and do it. It's something you have to really have a handle on. You really have to understand in depth. So all these criteria on how the training is organized, the criteria for selection, etc., all this needs to be done very effectively, very carefully. Otherwise, it's useless. There's no point in doing it. We've seen the results, and the results we've seen can be very bad. Extremely superficial approach to these problems. Very good. The President has asked for the floor. Just one brief comment, which goes back both to cooperation of civil society and training, which seems to come up time and time again. We have a list of sites and organizations that do things, and we've identified a very well-organized association in Bologna, and they provide material for teachers and schools to help teach teachers on how to present the role of women and present the role of women in history without gender filters. And it's very complex and very well-done material. So you really have to start and go back to schools to get rid of stereotypes. Can you imagine journalists? It's too late by then. So there's the big subject of trainer training, and that always is crucial. And it was mentioned before. Unfortunately, and I do apologize because I know many others would like to ask questions. I apologize also to the panelists because we have run out of time, but our day will continue. At 1:30 there will be a buffet lunch for all participants. You will be shown where to go. And for those who wish, at 2 p.m. you can have a short guided tour of Parliament. It will be available in both English and French. So thank you all.